to find out more about how we can get youth involved in the conservative movement, because I feel like a lot of people aren't necessarily liberal but aren't necessarily conservative, but whenever they do lean towards the conservative side, they feel kind of lost and they don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
So what would you
I think there's a whole strategy to getting young people who are kind of on the fence into the conservative sphere. Usually that happens after college graduation when they see their first paycheck and they wonder what happened to all their money. But in terms of, conservatives who are young who are already in the movement, a lot of them do feel like maybe they don't fit in with a lot of groups on campus. Maybe, college Republicans isn't so much their thing. When I was in college, I didn't, join college Republicans until my junior year because I just felt like it wasn't really worth my time. But I think that there's a way for older generations of conservatives to really harvest that talent and harvest that activism that they'll have. For example, when I was a senior in college, I went to a local radio show to do some advertising for a banquet we were putting on, and in between the breaks, I was telling them all about what my liberal professors were saying in class. And so they invited me back, and this 10-minute segment that I did eventually every week turned into an hour every week about me coming into the studio and talking to the local community about what was actually going on inside the classroom at the university. Huge hit, it gave me a place, foot in the door with media, and it was just a way for the host, whose name is John Justice, to really mentor me in terms of giving me an outlet and also showing the world that there are young conservatives who do exist, and instead of acting like they're not there, you should go find them and give them an outlet. So I think that, whether it's giving them a position of an intern somewhere or just bringing them along to a Tea Party rally or something like that, is a good way to kind of let them belong and feel like they're not alone.
Well, what was something really outrageous that one of your professors said one time? So many stories. Yeah. Where did you go to school again?
I went to the University of Arizona, which is in one of David Horowitz's books as one of the most liberal universities in the country.
Wow.
Yes. You wouldn't think so, being in Arizona, but it is. Right off the top of my head, the one that I remember the most was, it was in a lecture of 250 people, professors wearing Birkenstocks, very
granola.
very granola, crunchy. And he tells the entire room that American soldiers are the same thing as terrorists because they're all engaging in the act of terror.
Really?
And so, raise my hand and say I think that there's a distinction between the two. I think that, Al-Qaeda terrorists are a lot different than American soldiers, and I would appreciate it if you would, distinguish the two, because it's pretty, damaging for him to be saying that to a group of 250 people.
Definitely.
So that was probably the most outrageous thing. I also had a teaching assistant once after we were, 2 seconds after we were talking about the one-child policy in China, ask the class, do you think the one-child policy would work anywhere else in the world? And I said, well, it wouldn't work unless you're in a communist country, because you can't really enforce that unless the state has full control. And he says, China's not a communist country. And so I'm thinking, okay, yes they are, right? But people love hearing those stories, and we hear a lot about the indoctrination that goes on in our university system. But, conservatives own talk radio, whether it's local or national, and they should take advantage of that and really show people from the inside out where their kids are learning what they're learning when they're off at school.
Do you think talk radio is reaching out to young people, though? Because I honestly don't know very many people.
I don't think they are in the way that they
listen to the radio at all.
I don't think they are in the way that they should be. I think that they, I'm not a producer, but I think that, giving a college student in your town who is, well-spoken and, has the same values as you should give them some time on your show, because they'll go to their friends, and they'll probably have friends who aren't just conservatives. They'll have friends who are liberals, they'll have friends who are independents, or friends who don't care about politics, and they'll talk about that to them. Maybe they'll listen once.
Yeah.
And they'll listen to you, and then they'll maybe listen to the show. So I think that's a way for, if you want to reach youth, you have to do it peer-to-peer, and then you can kind of, move from there. So.
Yeah.
to get more involved with their local communities.
Based on your personal experience, how did your parents engage you into being interested in politics and wanting to take a stand?
Well, it wasn't that my parents were ever really hammering it into me. You know, they didn't sit me down and have a conversation, you know, like the birds and the bees of politics. They never did that. But they would talk about how, you know, the government was affecting their lives at the dinner table.
So they made it personal.
Yeah, in a very, you know, just conversation style way. They didn't, you know, sit down and say, this is what they're doing, this is blah, 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 but they would talk about it in the context of our life and what it meant. I wrote a letter to Bill Clinton when I was 6 or 7 saying that it was unfair that he was spending our money and that we should be able to spend his money. And obviously at that time there was a tax increase going through. And so that's something that I, you know, picked up on by just having my parents talk about it. Maybe not even to me, but just, you know, in the realm of where I was and where my brother was. But I think a lot of the time, you know, in our culture, politics is one of those topics that people think you shouldn't talk about, and it's rude to talk about it, it's taboo. And with your own kids, I'm not a mom, but I think that you shouldn't feel that way. I think that, you know, people don't realize that politics actually affects how they live their life, whether they want it to or not, and ignoring it isn't going to make it go away.
Definitely affects the paycheck.
Exactly. And then that affects your opportunities. I know that we've talked about how you've changed your career path based on, you know, legislation coming from Washington, D.C., and so that has serious consequences on people's lives. So I think that parents just talking about it around the dinner table, like Ronald Reagan said, or just, you know, in the car or whatever. My mom had talk radio on sometimes in the car, so that was something that got me introduced to that. So just, you don't have to sit down and say, these are Republicans, these are Democrats.
Like, you're going to vote this way.
This is what liberal means, this is what conservative means. If you just talk about issues in the context of your daily life, then your kids will, you know, naturally fall into where they feel like they should.
Yeah.
So that's what I think that parents should do.
Just going back to the topic of kids and politics, what do you think about Barack Obama using children as kind of props at media events and whatnot lately?
I think it's creepy, considering this is a man who actually believes in infanticide. I think it's weird that he would use children and then get up there and say that, you know, we want these kids to get to their first birthday. Well, in order to get to your birthday, your next birthday, you have to be born first. But that aside, based on using children as props, I think it's deplorable, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, liberal or conservative. I do think that there are, you know, obviously issues that affect children more. National debt is something that children are going to have to pay off. Children who are unborn today owe $200,000 to the federal government. But I don't think that, you know, having kids write a letter to you and have them read it and then sending it out on the official White House website is appropriate in the least. So I would say that all politicians should stay away from that.
I know maybe you've noticed, but I know a lot of my friends and I personally have noticed my paycheck last week was a little bit smaller. And I noticed that Social Security tax definitely went back up. So what do you think about that? What do you think about, I guess, the future for our generation going forward with that?
Well, on the Social Security question, Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. If you don't believe me, you can go look up the definition of a Ponzi scheme.
Do you think it'll exist by the time?
Oh no, it doesn't exist now. The money that comes out of your paycheck today is worth more under your mattress than it is with the federal government. It comes out of your paycheck, it's already gone, it's nothing. Not going to be there for you. It's something that's being spent now on older generations that you're never going to see. And there's only so long that you can have younger people paying for you, especially when our population is actually not steady at this point. There are less young people today. It's going to keep going that way because it's not economically feasible to have children anymore. But it's a big scam, and the government is stealing money from people who could have used it to actually invest in their retirement.
Or pay bills.
Or pay bills, or get an education, or whatever. So I think it's really sad. It's really upsetting to me that they take that much from you. You work a lot of hours every week to pay the government so they can provide you nothing. On, in terms of our generation, I think that people don't get it. They don't look at their paycheck. They don't add up the taxes they're paying. But I think eventually they'll realize that $16 trillion in debt now is just taxation later. And it's going to come a time when someone's going to have to pay the bills, and that's us. And will that happen in 10 years? Will it be in 20? I don't know, but it's going to happen. And I think that people will probably start changing their mind once they see they don't have opportunity, they can't pay for the things that they were promised, and the government isn't doing what they promised to them either.
So do you think like the American dream is still something that we're capable of, our generation?
I think so, but I think it's definitely more difficult. It's sad to me that I believe it was Microsoft said that if they started their company today, they wouldn't have made it like they did. I think that's really depressing.
Ironic.
Yeah, and I think about maybe it was some big company. I could be wrong about that, but the point is that how many companies like that could have been started if there wasn't this environment of government suffocation on business and everything else. So I think that people are going to see that reaching those dreams are harder, and they're going to want to move to states like Texas that have a friendly business environment. I think the American dream is still alive. I'm a firm believer in if you work hard for what you want, you'll get it. But I think it's definitely more difficult.
We all know you as the Fast and Furious girl.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about
That doesn't mean in a bikini next to a car, by the way. There are a lot of people who contributed to reporting on Fast and Furious, but my role, and I felt like I, was given this opportunity to write a book about it and get it into the story, into another venue that it had been. That's bookstores and on other forms of media. It was, a big project. You're taking on some pretty big people in the government. The Department of Justice is not very friendly. ATF is not very friendly. The Department of Justice actively worked with Media Matters, which, as we all know, is funded by George Soros and is bent on smearing conservatives and conservative media. Justice Department worked actively with them to attack me and whistleblowers in multiple cases, but specifically Fast and Furious. So it was a big project, but it was something that needed to be done, and someone needed to do it, and I was given the opportunity to. So I've heard, my whole goal was to get more people the story, and I've heard from a lot of people who've said that they never would have known about it if it wasn't for that. So, I just tried to play my part and helping get some people some answers. It's ongoing. We'll see. It hasn't been a whole lot of accountability, but I feel like we've done more than would have been done, so that's a good thing.
Definitely. I guess, what sort of ramifications have you had since then?
Well, as I mentioned, the Justice Department doesn't like me.
What does that mean?
That they work with, outside organizations to try and smear my reputation.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example?
Well, if you just, Matthew Boyle, actually, the Daily Caller did a big story about this because he was, listed as well, but he just FOIA'd some emails between the Public Affairs Officer at the Justice Department and Media Matters and came back with a whole lot of information about, what they were saying, what they were doing. DOJ talking points were being printed in Media Matters as a rebuttal to my book. And so, that's an interesting aspect. Congress said they were going to, at least the Oversight Committee in the House, said that they were going to hold a hearing about that because that's completely inappropriate for the, taxpayer-funded department that's about the law, where everyone's equal, using an outside source to smear journalists and whistleblowers. And with whistleblowers in particular, it's illegal for them to do that. But, the first time I went to ATF headquarters, I was greeted with "Oh, nice to meet you" kind of thing.
You're the one girl.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, it is what it is, and, if they don't want that to happen, then they should not do those things.
I'm Lauren with Katie Pavlich at the Right Online conference with On Point Broadcasting.